Hi, it's Sidney Kean again with Carlo Colodi's Adventures of Pinocchio, Chapter 7, Part 1. I'm doing this in 2 parts, purely because it's far too long for you to actually sit for that amount of time and concentrate. Well, I think it is anyway. I'm reading it, wow, it's huge, absolutely huge. So, without more ado, here we go. The puppet returned to the town and began to count the minutes one by one, and when he thought that it must be time, he took the road leading back to the Field of Miracles. Whilst building castles in the air, he arrived in the neighbourhood of the field. He looked, but could see nothing. He entered the field. He went right up to the little hole where he had buried his sovereigns, and still, you guessed it, nothing. Pinocchio began with his hands and nails to dig up the earth that he had watered. The money was no longer there. He rushed back at once to the town and the courts of justice to denounce the 2 knaves who had robbed him to the judge. Pinocchio told the judge everything. The judge listened intently and was much touched and moved. And when the puppet had nothing further to say, he stretched out his hand and rang a bell. At this summons, 2 great mastiffs immediately appeared, dressed as gendarmes. The judge, then pointing to Pinocchio, said to them, "That poor devil has been robbed of 4 gold pieces. Take him up, put him immediately into prison." And there he remained for 4 months. And he would have remained longer still if a fortunate chance had not released him. For the young emperor who reigned over the town, having won a splendid victory over his enemies, ordered great public rejoicings. There were illuminations and fireworks, and as a further sign of triumph, he commanded that all the prisoners should be liberated. "If others are to be let out of prison, I will go also," said Pinocchio to the jailer. "No, not you," said the jailer, "because you do not belong to the fortunate class." "I beg your pardon," replied Pinocchio. "I am a prisoner and a criminal." "In that case you are perfectly right," said the jailer, and taking off his hat and bowing to him respectfully, he opened the prison doors and let him escape. You can imagine Pinocchio's joy when he found himself free. Without stopping to take breath, he immediately left the town and took the road that led to the fairy's house. But before long, he began to suffer so dreadfully from hunger that he could not bear it, and he jumped into a field by the wayside, intending to pick some bunches of muscatel grapes. Oh, that he'd never done it. He had scarcely reached the vines when, crack! His legs were caught between 2 cutting irons, and he became so giddy with pain that stars of every colour danced before his eyes. The poor puppet had been taken in a trap put there to capture some big polecats who were the scourge of the poultry yards in the neighbourhood. At last night came on, partly from the pain of the trap and cut legs, and a little from fear of finding himself alone in the dark and in the midst of the fields. The puppet was on the point of fainting. At that point, he saw a firefly flitting over his head. He called to it and said, "O little firefly, will you have pity on me and liberate me from this torture?" "Poor boy," said the firefly, stopping and looking at him with compassion. "But how could your legs have been caught by those sharp irons?" I came into the field to pick 2 bunches of these muscatel grapes. But were the grapes yours? No. But then who taught you to carry off other people's property? I was so hungry. Hunger, my boy, is not a good reason for appropriating what does not belong to us. That is true. That is true, said Pinocchio, crying. I will never do it again. At this moment, their conversation was interrupted by a slight sound of approaching footsteps. It was the owner of the field, coming on tiptoe to see if one of the polecats that ate his chickens during the night had been caught in his trap. His astonishment was great when, having brought out his lantern from under his coat, he perceived that instead of a polecat, a boy had been taken. "Ah, little thief!" cried the angry peasant. "Then it is you who carry off my chickens!" "No, it is not I. Indeed, it is not I," cried Pinocchio, sobbing. "I only came into the field to take 2 bunches of grapes." "He who steals grapes is quite capable of stealing chickens. Leave it to me. I will give you a lesson that you will not forget in a hurry." Opening the trap, he seized the puppet by the collar and carried him to his house as if he had been a young lamb. When he reached the yard in front of the house, he threw him roughly on the ground, and putting his foot on his neck, he said to him, "It is late, and I want to go to bed. We will settle our accounts tomorrow. In the meanwhile, as the dog who kept guard at night died today, you shall take his place at once. You shall be my watchdog." And taking a great collar covered with brass knobs, he strapped it tightly round his throat, that he might not be able to draw his head out of it. A heavy chain attached to the collar was fastened to the wall. "If it should rain tonight," he then said to him, "you can go and lie down in the kennel. The straw that has served as a bed for my poor dog for the last 4 years is still there. If unfortunately robbers should come, remember to keep your ears pricked and to bark." After giving him this last injunction, the man went into the house, shut the door, and put up the chain. Poor Pinocchio remained lying on the ground, more dead than alive from the effects of cold, hunger, and fear. From time to time he put his hands angrily to the collar that tightened his throat and said, crying, "It serves me right. Decidedly it serves me right. I was determined to be a vagabond and a good for nothing. I would listen to bad companions, and that is why I always meet with misfortunes. If I'd been a good little boy, as so many are, if I had been willing to learn and to work, if I had remained at home with my poor little papa, I should not now be in the midst of the fields and obliged to be a watchdog to a peasant. Oh, if I could be born again! But now it's too late, and I must have patience." Relieved by this little outburst, which he came straight from his heart, he went into the dog kennel and fell asleep. He had been sleeping heavily for about 2 hours, when towards midnight he was roused by a whispering of strange voices that seemed to come from the courtyard. Putting the point of his nose out of the kennel, he saw 4 little beasts with dark fur that looked like cats standing consulting together. But they were not cats. They were polecats, carnivorous little animals, especially greedy for eggs and young chickens. One of the polecats, leaving his companions, came to the opening of the kennel and said in a low voice, "Good evening, Melampo." "My name is not Melampo," answered the puppet. "Oh, then who are you?" "I am Pinocchio." "And what are you doing here?" "I am acting as a watchdog." "Then where is Melampo? Where is the old dog who lived in this kennel? He died this morning. Is he dead? Poor beast, he was so good. But judging you by your face, I should say that you were also a good dog. I beg your pardon. I am not a dog. Not a dog? Then what are you? I am a puppet. And you're acting as a watchdog? That is only too true as punishment. Well then, I will offer you the same conditions that we made with the deceased Melampo, and I am sure you will be satisfied with them. What are those conditions? One night in every week you are to permit us to visit this poultry yard, as we have hitherto done, and to carry off 8 chickens. Of these chickens, 7 are to be eaten by us, and 1 we will give you, on the express understanding, however, that you pretend to be asleep, and that it never enters your head to bark and to wake the peasant. Did Melampo act in this manner? Asked Pinocchio. Certainly, and we were always on the best terms with him. Sleep quietly, and rest assured that before we go we will leave by the kennel a beautiful chicken ready plucked for your breakfast tomorrow. Have we understood each other clearly? Only too clearly, answered Pinocchio, and he shook his head threateningly, as much as to say, you shall hear of this shortly. The 4 polecats, thinking themselves safe, repaired to the poultry yard, which was close to the kennel, and having opened the wooden gate with their teeth and claws, they slipped in one by one. But they had only just passed through when they heard the gate shut behind them with a great violence. End part 1 of chapter 7.